Hello, NCEA participants. I am Kristen Kamyati Sheehan. I am the program director for the Play Like a Champion Today educational series, and I have had the privilege to be a part of this program since its inception in 2006, responsible for partner relationships and development of new curriculum.
My name is Pete Piscatello. I am the Director of Operations for the Play Like a Champion Today educational series. I've had the privilege of working here for the last 5 years, since 2017. And before that, was able to work in sports at the youth level in the Archdiocese of Kansas City in Kansas. So experience on both sides there. And we are thrilled to be here today to share with you what we think is really a transformational program for Catholic schools in the PE classroom. See on the screen a QR code that you can click using your phone or tablet's camera at any time, or you can also put in that web address you see on the screen. And then it'll take you to a page with some resources. We're going to spend some time today going through some different activities, and we're going to talk about some things that will reference these resources. So you'll find a number of different things on there, from some Vatican documents we'll discuss to some reflection questions that'll be a part of the activities we take you through here today. And you will find all of that by using that QR code. Now, we will have that QR code pop up on some slides throughout the presentation, but you can always pull up that particular website as well, and you will have access to those resources at any time. We're going to begin, as we like to begin a lot of presentations, by diving right in to show you what this faith formation and character development in the PE classroom might look like. And so we're going to ask you to take a moment to put yourselves in the shoes of a 5th through 8th grader in your school. Whether you're a teacher or an administrator, take a moment to just put yourself in those shoes. We're going to take you through what a lesson might look like as we integrate these important components. And then we'll come back to some of the research behind this and why we believe this is such an important thing that we can do in our schools. But we want to begin with this lesson. And so we're going to begin, as we begin all things, in prayer. If you'll join me, you can see the prayer on the screen. We just pray in the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Saint Sebastian, patron of athletes, you lived in the early days of the church, when to be a Christian often meant to be persecuted for your beliefs and even die for your faith. As an officer in the Roman palace guard, you are a shining example of strength and courage, not simply through your physical presence, but through your deep conviction in Christ. Your faithfulness stands as an example to athletes as we strive to grow strong, not just in body, but also in mind and soul. We ask you to pray for our class as we learn the value of play and how to be a champion. Extend your helpful protection upon all the athletes in this class to play safely, free from injury, and with a spirit of kindness as we compete with one another. Amen. You can see that prayer is one that we would lead a class with, and certainly it's appropriate here today for us as well. So I'm going to turn it back over to Kristen to take you through a little bit of a lesson here.
So attendees, keep yourselves in the shoes of a 5th to 8th grade student, and I am now your teacher, and I'd like to tell you the story of Saint Sebastian. As you just heard, he was an early Christian saint and martyr, and according to our traditional belief, he was killed during the Roman Emperor Diocletian's persecution of Christians. So Saint Sebastian had prudently concealed his faith, but in 286, many, many years ago, it was detected. And Diocletian commanded he be bound to a stake so that archers could shoot arrows at him. The archers did this. They shot him full of arrows and then left him there for death. Miraculously, he survived. The arrows didn't kill him. And the widow of Castellus, or Irene of Rome, came to retrieve his body and discovered he was still alive. She brought him back to her house, nursed him back to health, and he continued on his ministry. However, this didn't stop Sebastian from proclaiming his faith. He was later, as tradition tells it, near a staircase when the emperor passed, and he chose to mock the emperor for his cruelties against Christians. Well, Diocletian heard him, and he again sentenced him to death. And this time, Sebastian was seized and beaten to death. So we call Saint Sebastian the patron saint of athletes. So we're going to have a discussion now, class. What inspires you about Saint Sebastian? So as a teacher, I would pause and let the students give their responses. I'd like you to consider what inspires you about Saint Sebastian if you were a student. And then I would continue with the other open-ended questions and asking the students the questions that are there in the lesson. Then I would direct the students for a personal reflection time after the class discussion. And you'll see that a very big part of our approach is for the teacher not to lecture solely, but for the teacher to ask open-ended questions to elicit feedback and information and thoughts from the students to help with the teaching. Then after that discussion, the students are encouraged to write their reflections. So Play Like a Champion has a playbook that we would offer, and it's a digital playbook, and you can see the boxes there. Students can actually type their personal reflections right into the box for the teacher to then go and check to make sure they understood what the assignment was. So then we would conclude the segment, this lesson, with a prayer. But before we do that, I would encourage teachers to consider an additional activity, and that is about we are all called to be saints. So I just want to quote Pope Francis from his general audience in St. Peter's Square in 2014. Pope Francis said, "We are all called to be saints. But we must remember that holiness is a gift from God, not something we can achieve on our own. Holiness is not granted only to those who have the opportunity to break away from the ordinary tasks and to devote themselves to prayer. Rather, everyone, no matter what age, is called to holiness in their own state of life. Indeed," Pope Francis says, "it is by living with love and offering Christian witness in our daily tasks that we are called to become saints. Always and everywhere, you can become a saint. That is, by being receptive to the grace that is working in us and leads us to holiness." And so we would encourage teachers to engage in an additional activity that helps them to connect Saint Sebastian, this ancient saint, more intentionally with their class and the idea that they too are called to become a saint. That is their personal journey. And so we would take this picture of Saint Sebastian that is on the screen right there and put it onto a JPEG or a piece of paper, and then take photos of everyone in the class and put them around Saint Sebastian as a symbol that we're all members of this potential community of saints. You can print this out, you can have kids sign it, you can give it to each of the kids, you can post it in the classroom as that consistent visual reminder of our call to become saints. Then our closing prayer. So you'll notice that we are always sandwiching the lessons in the PE classroom with prayer, opening and closing. And the very simple prayer that we would encourage is the teacher to say, "Saint Sebastian," and the whole class responds, "Pray for us." Now, moving forward beyond the first lesson, we'd encourage the PE teacher to transfer responsibility for that prayer to the class. And each class member can begin that prayer by saying, "Saint Sebastian." The rest of the class responds collectively, "Pray for us." You can even add in the athletic connection and have the class circle up to conclude the class with prayer, and even have them do hands in. "Saint Sebastian, pray for us."
Now, as Kristen mentioned in some of Pope Francis's comments, certainly, the Pope has a lot to say about saints, but it turns out the Catholic Church has actually had quite a bit to say about the importance of physical activity and virtue as well. And this goes back to St. Thomas Aquinas in the Middle Ages, who asked, "Is there virtue in play?" His affirmative response can be seen in the advent of even recess in the earliest Jesuit schools, and in subsequent comments by papal figures from Pius X to St. John Paul II, and of course, Pope Francis. So I'm going to read from you just a little more from Pope Francis from a 2015 address he made to coaches. And I think this applies to our administrators and certainly PE teachers in our classrooms, and will provide some context for what we're talking about here today. Pope Francis said, all of us in life are in need of educators, mature, wise, and balanced persons that help us grow in the family, in study, in work, in the faith. Educators that encourage us to take the first steps in a new activity without having fear of the obstacles and the challenges to be faced, that spur us to surmount difficult moments, that exhort us to have confidence in ourselves and in our companions, that are at our side, be it in moments of disappointment and loss, be it in those of joy and success. The sports coach, and I would add here, the physical education teacher in our schools, especially in Catholic environments of amateur sport, can become for so many young people one of these good educators, so important for the development of a mature, harmonic, and complete personality. And so the church made its first major attempt to bring really all of these ideas together in its 2018 document from the Vatican, Giving the Best of Yourself, a human document, or a document on the Christian perspective of sport and the human person. That came out in June 2018. It's believed to be the first document dedicated to sports released by the Vatican. And it recognizes the deep connection between Christianity and sport, while really emphasizing the immense impact of sport in our world today. Further, this document discusses the ways in which the worldwide church, of which we are certainly a part, should approach sport, and encourages everyone to respond in their own communities. And certainly, our schools are an important part of this. So in 2019, Play Like a Champion, both Christian and I were involved in a symposium on this document. And we ended up writing a book and publishing it with NCEA. You can see that here on the screen, titled Play Like a Champion, Following the Vatican's Lead to Elevate the Culture of American Sport. Now, this book offers a call to action for our American church with details on how to elevate the culture of Catholic-sponsored youth sports programs and schools. Pope Francis called sport an instrument of encounter, formation, mission, and sanctification. And if those four words, encounter, formation, mission, and sanctification, sound familiar, it's because they really exemplify a lot of what we're doing in our Catholic schools. So our presentation today is really an extension of this call to action within our schools. And we think you'll see as we go through this how a PE curriculum, a PE classroom that really focuses on faith formation and development, character development, in addition to just the physical activity, really helps exemplify this mission and this call of the church. Really, you might say you're in a very special position as a teacher administrator, because the Pope and bishops across the country are inviting you to be a part of what we might call an American sport apostolate. Really, a group believe in and commit to embracing this vision that we talked about, that the Vatican has put forward. One of the concrete ways that this can be enacted is through an intentional teaching of curriculum that embodies the faith and embraces joy of physical activity as a mode of continued formation. You've heard that everyone has a vocation from God, right? And sometimes we talk about this with big V and little v. So your big V may be marriage or a call to the religious life for some of you. But little v vocation, we can talk about a very special significance as you represent Christ and the application of the church's fullest understanding of the importance of physical activity in the formation of the children within your classrooms. And that's what brings us here today. So I'm going to play a short video for you here that'll show you a little bit more about the program we're developing and what we'll equip you with here over the next hour.
Play Like a Champion's mission is to build an inclusive, play-focused youth sports culture that helps children to develop morally, socially, and spiritually as well as athletically.
This Play Like a Champion PE program will help you feel confident and motivated to participate in physical activity now and for the rest of your life.
Through its Team for Every Child initiative, Play Like a Champion works with leaders in economically distressed communities to guarantee that children, regardless of their athletic ability or family's income, have an enriching youth sport experience.
You will learn personal and social responsibility through goal setting, while character development and our Catholic faith are embedded in our physical activities in PE class.
Okay, I personally am fired up. Who doesn't want to be a part of an American sport apostolate? And this is our opportunity to do this in the physical education classroom. So in addition to that foundation of our Catholic faith and Catholic faith formation, the research methodology that underlies a physical education curriculum is threefold. TPSR, which I will go into shortly, incorporating social emotional learning with that emphasis on spirituality. So let me take you through what TPSR is, and it stands for teaching and taking personal and social responsibility through physical education. This is Don Hellison's 50-year life work and philosophy, which is unique in physical education and teacher education in youth development. Going back to the advent of his research and work in the 1970s, Hellison is well known in APFERD, which is the American Alliance for Health, Physical Education, Recreation, and Dance. He's well known for his work that aims to help children develop qualities of character through physical activity that substantially increases their opportunity to grow up successfully. APFERD is a national organization of 20,000 professionals that provides support and assistance to professionals involved in physical education, in recreation, fitness, sporting, and coaching. So the purpose of TPSR is to empower students to take responsibility for their own development and well-being and for contributing to the well-being of others. Sounds a lot like a Christian community to me. So Hellison has main criteria for his state-of-the-art effective youth development programs. So we want to highlight and emphasize these criteria, which can and should be utilized to assess the teacher's core values and approach to teaching an intentional PE curriculum. So these criteria can also be used as administrators to evaluate the teacher's performance. So I want to, so Pete, I think we need to advance the slide. Thank you very much. So if we were in person, we'd be breaking into groups. What I'd like to do is to read each of these criteria, and I'm going to pause and ask you to reflect upon and physically write down one tangible way a PE teacher can live this value. All right, so the first value is to treat youth as resources to be developed, build on the strengths they already possess, and emphasize their competence and mastery. How might a PE teacher live this value? One thing that comes to my mind is never comparing students to each other, approaching each child as an individual. Number two, from the key criteria, is to focus on the whole person, the emotional, social, and cognitive, as well as physical dimensions of the self. In PE class, one thing that comes to my mind is we might just reflect upon the physical skills of something. We want to always look at the whole student and not neglect the emotional or the social or the mental end of that each individual student. Number three, respect the individuality of youth, including cultural differences and developmental needs. As a PE teacher, how do you celebrate cultural differences so that each class is a unique community made in the image of likeness of God in different colors and different sizes? Number four is empower youth. This is where the open-ended questions as a PE teacher come in. Ask questions, seek the input of your students rather than just telling students what the lesson is that day. Number 5, give clear expectations based on a solid, explicit set of values. We recommend a value for each class, which we will share with you moving forward. Post that value in your classroom. Remind athletes or students of that value. Ask them what that value means frequently. Number 6, help youth envision possible futures for themselves. Ask kids, where do you see this taking you in the future? What do you want to be? What do you dream of becoming? This also shows an implicit interest in each young person as a beautiful creation of God. Number 7, provide both a physically and psychologically safe environment. The PE classroom should be safe for all students, regardless of their physical ability. And every athlete and student should feel that way as they walk in the door. Number 8, encourage participation over a long period of time, emphasizing belonging and membership. This is where encouraging the joy of physical activity so that physical literacy becomes a value for every student in your classroom. Number 9, maintain a local connection. You might introduce all of your students to their local sports program offered through the Catholic schools or the Catholic League, so that encourage each of those students to get involved in that athletic pursuit. Number 10, provide courageous and persistent leadership in the face of systemic obstacles. If there's a student in your class who might not have the funds to participate in a sport program, help them to find a way around that. Contact your local league to assist, to elicit support for that young person. Number 11, provide significant contact with a caring adult. This is you. Be that face of love, be that face of Jesus for each and every one of your PE students. And so now these are Don Hellison's core values, and we've coupled these values with a value from Play Like a Champion. So always, always put kids first. In an academic program, in a school, we must respond to the needs of our students, every student. We must be always child-centric, child-centered. Always go back and reflect, teachers, is what I did today effective for every one of my students in class? Number 2 is human decency. This is essentially citizenship education, or taking it a step further in our Catholic schools, it's training every young person to be a saint, to be a positive and loving Christian in the world for their lifelong. Third value is holistic self-development. This is where this idea of becoming a champion is so core to this curriculum approach. Every young person can be a champion, and we're going to talk about that moving forward. And then finally, this is a way of being, that we are building disciples of Christ in our school building so that they are engaged and effective citizens in our communities. Now, these are the PE teacher responsibilities: being relational with the kids, and we're going to talk about how teachers can and should do that. We are going to encourage PE teachers to gradually empower the students, that is, shifting responsibility to the activities and the responsibility of the class and the structure to the students themselves. And then there's lessons that we intentionally take on that embed character and faith, but then how do you put those into the physical activity? For instance, if the lesson is on being a champion and you talk about champion characteristics, the teacher should call out when the teacher sees these characteristics actually displayed within the physical activity of the class. The next step is to transfer. This is where we put it all together. We encourage PE teachers to check in with homeroom teachers, with playground monitors, with lunchroom monitors. Do they see the lessons that are being taught in the PE classroom transferring to the other elements of the school community, which is always the goal? And then finally, self-reflection. And the teacher should have their own playbook to reflect back and think, how am I doing in each of these elements? And do I see the students in my class learning these character traits and embracing their faith and spirituality throughout the physical activity in the PE class? Now I'd like to introduce a video that I've mentioned to you that we have a large emphasis on this ownership of the athlete or the students and getting the kids to respond and teach some of the lessons. And this is a video example of how a teacher can engage in these kinds of discussions with their class.
When I first started coaching, I had a really big team. There were 15 girls, but there was one girl and her name was Celeste, and she was always off to the side. She didn't really participate. She sat at the end of the bench. She didn't really talk to any of the girls during practice, during games. And I noticed it, but I didn't really know what to do about it. And then in one of our very first games, I had another child on my team that was really athletic and strong and skilled, and her name was Amy. And when I finally put Celeste in, Amy just yelled at her when she dropped a ball. And my heart just sank because I thought, oh goodness, what should I do? And Amy, said, catch the ball, catch the ball. And I could just see Celeste shrinking inside of herself. So what do you guys think? What would you have done if you were one of those other 13 members on the team, or if you were the coach?
I mean, I think part of being a team and our responsibility to be on the team is to be committed and to build each other up as friends, not just as teammates, but to build relationships and build each other up instead of break each other down.
I think it's important to have a good relationship on a team, because when you're all connected as one on a team, that's what a team should be. It's like a chain. So if Celeste is that missing chain, then the chain isn't complete. You need to bring Celeste into the chain, get her involved.
Yeah. What about you guys? What do you ladies think?
I think that Amy is like a bully, and if we keep on letting her bully Celeste, then it's just going to bring our team down, and we don't want that.
Right. Yeah.
Adding on to what she said, how one person like Amy starts to bully the one person, Celeste, then everyone on the other team starts to catch on and say, oh, she's doing it, then maybe we can do it. And it's just like a ripple effect, and everyone keeps on doing it, so then now all the rest of the team are against Celeste. But then if one person can make the difference, turn the tide, and everyone else would also be very nice to her.
What's a way that you could be nice to Celeste?
You could ask her if she wanted to be your partner, and you could work together with her. And I think it's just your responsibility as a team to include everyone and have just be a big family.
Do you guys have any other ideas about what I could have done as a coach, or what some of those other teammates could have done to help Celeste feel included?
You could find one of her strengths on the court, because even though she's not skilled, she probably has some other strengths too. She could probably be the team energizer on the bench, or in the game she could lead the huddles.
Oh, that's a great idea. To help her find the way she can be the key contributor, which helps her be part of that chain like you were talking about. Yeah. Well, you guys, thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate all your insights.
That's a fantastic example of a way that you can really bring character development and that ownership component through discussion with student athletes, with children in your PE classroom. We also know, though, that physical development is a priority in the PE classroom, right? So we want to spend some time with the research on that and how to best develop kids to develop and grow appropriately. It's important that teachers understand the stages of development. Now, we all know that kids grow physically at various rates and that their mental, emotional, and social capabilities will also develop as they mature. But we must be careful not to teach above their levels. So, additionally, kids from the same age will have different capacities. We should design our lessons with different ability levels in mind, offering modifications to make an exercise or activity more or less challenging based on where they're at, while placing an emphasis on fun, right? Differentiation applies to the PE classroom just as it does to any of our other academic classrooms. Quick example on this. I don't know if we use this in any of our PE classrooms anymore, but I remember when I was a young child and you always had the rope, right? The climbing the rope in the PE classroom. I haven't seen that in a while, so I don't know if any of you still use that. And we recognize that there's different tests and standards that a PE teacher is, going to use to test the physical fitness of the kids. But that rope, that was one that always got me as a young child. I could never climb that rope at all. And so I dreaded going to PE class when that rope was out. Other kids could scurry on up to the top, but I feel like half of us couldn't even bother to climb it, right? Is there a way that we can take that particular lesson, that physical activity, and make sure there's a modification so that kids look forward to class and that they can actually participate and have fun regardless of what the activity is? You can take that to whatever activity you're doing, different games, different fitness tests, running, things like that. We want to make sure that we are emphasizing fun while also thinking about those modifications. We should encourage students to compare their progress to self-progress. We'll talk about mastery again a little bit later on. Mastery is a self-reference criteria for success rather than measuring success on social comparison. And of course, given social comparison is a serious problem with adolescents today, we can provide really a vital antidote to cultural issues that lead to mental and physical health challenges. And we can do that simply by focusing on helping kids to worry about their own progress and not compare themselves to others. Or as Kristen mentioned earlier, making sure that we aren't also comparing kids to each other. So when we talk about growth as development, as you see here on the screen, there's research that has been going on for decades into how we best develop athletes physically, respecting these different stages of development. The first widely accepted model for long-term athlete development was credited to Istvan Balyi. And here's a short video that explains the basics of what we call the LTAD model and its evolution.
So the science of LTAD, first let me explain what LTAD stands for. It's long-term athlete development. Some people say long-term athletic development. That's fine as well. It's really teaching age-appropriate activities so that kids learn when it's an appropriate time to train for certain elements of sport. So again, gets back to foundational sports skills. So that's a concept that started in Canada, and the United States Olympic Committee has now started a program out of Colorado Springs that's called the ADM, Athlete Development Model, and that's similar to the concept of long-term athlete development. And the United States Olympic Committee is now working with all the national governing bodies of sport to teach these elements of long-term athlete development so that people understand and realize that it's not just age-related, but maturity-related, and how kids learn and train best at certain age groups and time periods in their life.
That was Paul Roter, who has really been an expert working in this area for a while and has worked at the NCAA in their Sports Science Institute. You can see on the screen the long-term athlete development model that he just spoke about. And to give you some context, really that model, stage 1 was really meant to be about 6 to 10 years old. Stage 2, 10 to 14 years old, which we're talking about, 5th through 8th grade physical education. That's right in the wheelhouse of this group that we're talking a lot about here today. So those first 2 stages really hit the K through 8 age range. Stage 3, training to compete, is the high school years, 15 through 18, and then training to win is 18 plus. And I'll show you here the ADM model he referenced, and you'll see how some of those ages kind of compare a little bit. However, we this research developed that not all individuals mature at the same rate. And the YDM, the youth development model, helps emphasize that. Both authors actually of both these different models have since updated their models to reflect biological and maturation markers in development. They also note here, especially in the YDM model, several factors dictate growth and maturation. So think height, weight, how quickly that happens with kids, right? Throughout the ages, puberty, right? When do kids begin to really develop? And in the particularly later part of a K through 8 education, really the 5th through 8th grade and then into high school, you see a lot of dramatic differences between when kids hit these different levels. We also can't overlook critical factors such as genetics, right? We now know that if you have two very athletic parents, a child is much more likely to be athletic. And that's not necessarily the case, but certainly we know that helps. And also demographics, right? Home life, exposure to athletics. If kids don't have access to sports, then they certainly don't have an opportunity to grow and learn different skills. Now that's all developed into or evolved into the American development model, which is what you see most of the time here today. And there's a few different things to mention here, but you can see the stages, stage 1 and stage 2 really cover most of the same grouping there, right? It's all about discovering, learning, playing, and then beginning to develop and challenge, right? And we see that in the middle school years, really that 5th through 8th grade that I referenced before, where kids begin to understand training. And you see that in your physical education classroom, right? With the youngest children, a kindergarten class, it's more about just getting them moving and maybe introducing some games. In that older age group, kids are able to better understand how they improve different areas. Now, the American development model is really based on what you see bolded on the screen, lifelong physical literacy. And I think that's so critical to keep in mind. We're playing the long game here, and especially in a physical education classroom. For our kids who are playing sports outside of school, we see really some concerns with the way that marketing is encouraging them to specialize at a very, very young age, 4, 5, 6 years old. Because it's a $19 billion industry, and clubs and organizations are trying to get kids in as early as possible, and then sell them their product. We don't have that same sort of issue in terms of the academic component in the PE classroom, but it's important to understand this. So we talk a lot about early specialization versus late specialization. All of this research, and you see it in the stages here, suggest that there is no benefit to really specializing until the age of, and it can differ a little bit between 13, 14, 15 years old. There is some sports, gymnastics, figure skating, individual sports where you can see it a little earlier, where that specialization helps. And that makes sense if you think about watching the Winter Olympics this past winter, or Summer Olympics last summer. Those sports are ones where peak athletes tend to be a little younger. But for the vast majority of sports and all major team sports, particularly those in the United States that we devote a great deal of energy to, there's really no benefit to that early specialization. And an emphasis should instead be focused on the development of overall skills. And that's what you see reflected in both the LTAD and the ADM model, where stages 1, 2, and then 3 here, as you kind of go into 3, you begin to skew a little more towards competition, but the base, the foundation for development should always be those motor skills. We might say as teachers, we need to focus on the ABCs of athleticism, right? Fundamental motor skills before we can advance to really the more development, increases in strength and speed, building performance, focusing on all kinds of strategy and things like that. We've got to make sure we have a good foundation prior to that. And you can see that within these models. I'd encourage you to go online and take a look at these models further. The American development model was really started in 2009 by USA Hockey. It has since been developed 2014 and onward by the entire US Olympic and Paralympic Committee. And this is a model that they're using to develop Olympic athletes in this country. And so you'll see that even that model is focused on those foundational steps, building towards lifelong physical literacy. Now, how does this apply to a sort of program? And Kristen took you through the St. Sebastian sort of lesson at the beginning. How does that fit in the overall idea of what a curriculum looks like for a youth PE classroom? You can see here on the screen what we would suggest as a program format. We think a couple of things are really important. Some of this will get into what Kristen also mentioned in terms of things like relational time and community building. But it's really important that we are taking time to teach this intentionally in the classroom. What does that look like for us? We would say that if you are taking units, and you think you can fit about 5 units or so into the PE classroom during the year, that every 1 month, maybe 2 months, depending on the content you're teaching, you're spending a full time in the classroom. 30 minutes, we know, is usually what you'd have as a PE teacher. And you are taking that and using that to really intentionally teach these core principles, right? It's important to teach the core elements of any curriculum that we're talking about. And then for the subsequent 8 or maybe even more lessons, again, depending on what you're teaching, it's important that we do reinforcement lessons, that we take 5 minutes at the beginning of a class, and that we really allow teachers to reinforce the core elements while introducing the usual physical activity that you would see in PE class. So that's where, as you see here on the screen, there's 5 key elements that we would talk about in particular those reinforcement lessons. These certainly apply to the broader 30-minute lesson as well, but this is going to be most of your classes are going to occur much quicker. So just to take a quick look at these, when we talk about relational time, a lot of that happens as kids enter the gym class, right? Greet kids by name as a teacher, right? Mention something special about them. Make sure they know you care about them. Kristen mentioned earlier one of the key criteria being, a caring adult, right? That puts a focus on the kids. Take that opportunity as kids enter the class to make sure they know they are valued in your PE classroom. Build community, and this flows from the beginning of class. Chances are kids are talking to each other, but as you begin the class, whatever formation you are sitting in, make sure that you are introducing the reinforcement lesson for the day and asking kids open-ended questions. Again, Kristen mentioned a little bit about this earlier, about how they feel about things. You can see, the logo on the screen here. We're big proponents of the thumbs up, sideways, and thumbs down model as a quick way to gauge where students are at. Hey, we talked about goal setting. How do you guys feel about the concept of goal setting? Do you feel like you understand it? Quick thumbs up. You can see from your kids really easily and quickly gauge where they're at. So we know we don't have a lot of time, particularly in the classes with the reinforcement lessons. Then, of course, teach the lesson. Now in the 30-minute session, that'll be longer, but in the reinforcement lesson, you're talking about 5 minutes to reinforce something. That could be focusing on an individual type of goal, as we'll talk about here in a moment, that your kids are setting. It could be something like what we talked about with St. Sebastian, right? Giving a quick overview, and that actually is designed to be a little longer session, the St. Sebastian one in particular, because it's a really core theme for kids in terms of a great saint that they can model. But something like that may be one of the reinforcement lessons that reinforces a broader topic for our kids. Then, of course, the physical activity, which is such an important part of the PE classroom, but it's so critical that you are then blending in the other components, right? If you're talking about how to be a good sport, and that's one of the key criteria or components of your lesson, well, then while they're doing the physical activity, call out kids who are in fact being great sports and showing good sportsmanship. And then finally, we would make sure that you are spending or ending each class with some time for self-reflection. Again, you can use as a group the thumbs up, sideways, down, or we should say prayer, right? Prayer is always important to bookend class with an opening prayer and a closing prayer. So we want to make sure that reflection and prayer, and we'll talk about different types of prayer here in just a moment, are really an important part of the framework for each class. We mentioned levels of responsibility and themes. It's so important that we provide a great framework. Hellison talks about the levels of responsibility. And as you can see here, this is an example of what that might look like in our own curriculum from grades 5 through 8. talking about themes for an entire year of effort, right? Teaching fifth graders to have effort. And, there's a cardinal virtue that goes with that, the virtue of fortitude. And so how do we talk about those things and have that theme throughout the year so that we are really developing our children in that? You can see that those grow to the 8th grade level where we're talking about self-direction. Where kids are 13, 14 years old, really it's more appropriate age then to really work on that ownership even more than we do at the younger levels. It's always important, but you can scale up as you go through the grades. You see these levels 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5. It's important as well when we talk about Hellison's levels of responsibility. Kristen really did a great job of covering this earlier, the assessing the transfer to outside, right? Teachers should really reflect on this themselves. And as a PE teacher, this is an awesome opportunity to collaborate with other teachers and with other adults and administrators in your building to see how is this transferring outside. I know we have experience in our Play Like a Champion curriculum and training we do with coaches where you can really see character development having an impact on how kids interact in other classes and in places like lunch and recess. That's really critical to the kids, transferring that outside. So you can really make an impact there when we talk about these themes and the levels of responsibility that Hellison discusses. Finally, there's some other core elements that we want to highlight that we think really are an integral part of any PE curriculum that brings faith formation and character development into the PE classroom. We touched on themes, certainly having a virtue for each year, and the cardinal virtues are a great framework for grades. Fortitude, justice, prudence, and temperance are something you saw there on the previous slide as being involved in connected to those levels of responsibility. But also bringing in the saints and quotes from not just the saints, but Pope Francis, from bishops or priests who have had comments, saints certainly who have talked about these themes, right? And we can be inspired by those quotes, and kids can see some important thought process going on there. Prayers are so critical to this, and I mentioned doing beginning and end. Kristen has as well. But the different types of prayers that you use, we believe the PE classroom can be really a tremendous way to teach and connect prayer. Prayer creates an awareness of God's presence, and it's vital to our relationship with God. By incorporating prayer and teaching children a variety of different methods, we can supplement the formation being done in our kids' religious classes and connect God to physical activity. Again, this is a really great opportunity for you as a PE teacher to collaborate with your religion teachers, to find out what prayers, what topics they are learning in that class, and then to incorporate that within your PE class at grade-specific levels. You'll see here on the screen, certainly something that we include in our curriculum is Christian meditation, which is also something that's tremendous for athletes in terms of focusing and being present in the moment. And we'll talk more about that at the end. We'll close with an example of that here this session, but also Mysteries of the Rosary, in particular, sports-themed Mysteries of the Rosary. God's presence can be seen working through the gifts of each child, but we have to be intentional about introducing to that concept to them. And so when you take these prayers and you take them and devote them, you bring them to the PE classroom and certainly connect them with physical activity, you can really help connect prayer and develop the faith within this context and within an activity that kids really enjoy. And then finally, I would point out on this slide, another thing that's really important is those reflections. And we've mentioned that a couple of times because it is so important. It's important kids take time to reflect on what they learn, and really that we mix the mediums for doing that, even in the PE classroom. So just as with any classroom, a curriculum should provide a variety of ways to do this. We talked about discussion, large group discussion. You can break kids into smaller groups for some of the activities they do during class. Just some quick pulse, setting things, but also this opportunity to quietly reflect. Maybe to do that during class, but also, if you have a workbook, just like you'd have in a math or a science class, having a workbook associated with PE where they can take a moment later on to think back to that class and to think about how they felt how maybe they're progressing on their goals, things like that can be really important. And so you see playbook there on the screen. That's what we've developed as a workbook for the physical education classroom. Finally, I would just mention competencies and evaluations. Just like anything, it's so important that we're evaluating this as we go, both teachers and students. And there is a number of competencies that should be achieved, both physical standards, but also when we talk about, these ideas of character development and faith formation, what are we actively trying to accomplish during the year and during each unit of the year? And then evaluating that, finding out from the kids over the course of the year what they've learned, are they understanding it? And as a teacher, self-evaluation, right? How are you doing with these different concepts, and how is this working for you within the PE classroom?
All right, you guys ready for another unit? All right, I'm going to invite you to put yourselves again in the shoes of a 5th through 8th grade student and pretend that you're in this classroom. And I'm going to be your teacher. And this is really a core unit. It takes on a lot of the concepts that are really critical in applying this approach. And so my first open-ended question, like has been modeled over and over, has anyone ever seen this mantra? Play like a champion today. Raise your hand. Do any of you know what it means? At this point, you would pause and engage the class, take their answers, get their ideas, and then incorporate in your discussion things that were said from the class and explain the origins. So the Play Like a Champion Today sign hangs in the stairwell outside of the Notre Dame football locker room. And the University of Notre Dame is a Catholic university. And the sign hangs there as a reminder to their athletes that every time they run out onto the field of competition, they have a responsibility to play like a champion. In our class, we're going to talk about what that means to us. And so, class, I'd ask for you to consider that first element in the slogan, play. Why should we play? Again, eliciting responses from the class rather than lecturing. A good teacher technique also would be, if you have the ability, if you're in the classroom, to write on a chalkboard, or if you're in the gym or even outside, you could pull out a whiteboard or a newsprint flip chart and allow the words the students have said and the concept they've said to write on there, so they see that you are taking seriously their definitions. And then once they've given you your feedback, summarize using their words that sports are essentially games that we want to play, and they should be joyful for us and everybody involved. And play actually is a form of prayer. This is probably a new concept to students, but it's a good idea to start to introduce it right away. Now, if we're going to play, we want to play like a champion. Class, what makes a person a champion? So you're going to invite the students to name as many qualities of a champion as they can. What is a champion? What are the characteristics, the adjectives that equal a champion? So you're going to write those again on your whiteboard. If you don't have a whiteboard or a chalkboard, there is a spot for kids to write this in their playbook, or you could just have them write it on a piece of paper if you don't actually have the playbook. And then finally, class, we say, play like a champion today. What do you think this idea of today means? Gather the class's responses, and then you would give a summary that each time you come into this gym or to this playground is a new opportunity for you to play, to become your best, to become a champion in and of yourself. And this is what God had intended for each of you. And so then, including this, and I'll show you here, Pete's showing you on the screen, the reinforcement lessons to this main lesson. And I've gone through this main lesson very, very quickly. You'll take a little bit more time with the kids, but then reinforce this idea each class time you come in, and here's one of the reinforcement lessons. And that is a group activity. This is a reminder of what it is to be a champion. Class, sit down with your group and discuss the characteristics of a champion. Write them down. And then once they write them down, have them do a personal reflection. What characteristics do you possess as a champion? Give yourself a check mark on 2 or 3 of them that you feel you do quite well. And then, which ones do you personally want to work on? Circle those. And here's another reinforcement lesson where you can actually then take that list of champion lessons that the class came up with, and they can then circle the ones they want to work on personally. Another reinforcement lesson is, as a class, what lessons of a champion do we want to focus on this year? And you can circle those for class reinforcement qualities.
Through really very quickly what a lesson might look like. And we talked about Play Like a Champion, and then also at the beginning we talked about Saint Sebastian. But 2 other areas that we think are really, really important, particularly as you get through the later grades in elementary, 5th through 8th grade, for kids to have really much more time to go into, are goals and physical literacy. Now, we won't have time to go through full lessons here today, but we want to at least touch on these 2 areas because they are 2 key elements of the curriculum we've used, but also just anything you're going to cover in the PE classroom. Goals, in particular, we all know what goals are, but it's so important that we are intentional about these and that we focus on 4 types of goals. So you see those here on the screen: physical, mental, sportsmanship, which might also be called moral goals, and spiritual goals. And so we want to make sure that with kids, we are working to set those goals, to teach them what those goals are, and to set those goals both as a group, as a class setting, right? So kids learn to set goals as a group and work together towards those goals, and also individually, right? It's so critical they learn that. But even just saying goal setting, you can, it's vague and really doesn't get to the right type of goal. So we like to focus on, many of you probably heard of SMART goals, right? SMART goal is a way to think about goals that make sure those goals are really the best kind of goals you can set. So SMART stands for specific, measurable, action-oriented, realistic, and trackable. Your goal needs to meet all of those criteria. And if we're setting goals that do that in each of those areas, again, individually and as a group, then that's something that will really, set our kids down the right path. And as you can imagine, that can take several class periods, right? Really even a few months, the way we've set it up with your PE class, because first you want to teach about those goals, then you want to set group goals, you want to set individual goals, and you want to go back and track those, right? Evaluate your progress as you go along. How are those coming along? Set a plan, right? That's so important. What does it look like to work towards achieving that goal? And then how's that plan coming along, right? And we want to be able to work on all of that with the kids in our PE classes. Mastery is so important. Again, I referenced this earlier, but we're focusing on ourselves, right? Self-progress is the criteria, and maximizing our own ability rather than comparing ourselves to somebody else who may even have the same goal, right? So it's really important that we worry and focus on ourselves, which again is such a difficult thing for kids to do today because they're constantly pulled in the direction of comparing themselves to others. So this can be a really great way for us to emphasize not only goal setting, but also that mastery, that self-progress, that self-focus when it comes to goals, as opposed to comparing ourselves to others and, inevitably being either prideful or depressed, whether we are above or behind them. And really in the long run, that's not what it's about. So certainly goals, very important, and physical literacy, another really important part, as Kristen will talk about.
How exciting to think that we would actually have our students writing goals in these 4 areas of development. And writing the goal enables them to go back and track it year over year. And that's the value of doing a electronic written playbook and electronic exercises. So going back to that open-ended question, eliciting feedback from the class and transferring responsibility. In talking about physical literacy, a teacher would simply introduce this. Class, do you know what physical literacy is? Take their responses, help them to reason out a definition prior to actually giving them the definition, which is physical literacy is the motivation, confidence, and competence to understand and maintain physical activity through your whole life. Now, class, why is physical literacy so important? Taking lessons across answers from the class. And how can we engage in physical literacy? What activities do you love to do that will help you to maintain physical activity for your whole life? Again, writing their answers and then tracking what they do over the course of a week so that they would have a movement log. Another really important idea for teachers in this unit would be to encourage family movement activities. Ask them, what kind of family activity might you engage with together with your parents, your grandparents, your guardians, your siblings? Is it a game of tag in your yard? Is it doing a lap around the local track? Is it doing a bike race or maybe a sprinting competition so that families are getting involved and engaged in this?
Certainly wonderful ideas, and we've seen a lot of success with that. We're nearing the end of our hour here together, and we want to make sure we close with that Christian meditation, that prayer that we talked about. So real briefly, I'm going to go over this topic. We talked about this earlier, but it's so important that if we're going to bring faith formation into the PE classroom, that we're very intentional about it. We talked about God's presence, right? And being aware of God's presence through prayer. But we can also talk about and have full lessons on God's presence in play. Certainly understanding that the gifts and talents we've been given as kids and as adults, but for the kids in our PE classroom, come from God, and that God is present in their play. So again, asking those open-ended questions, as Christian just spoke about. Have you thought about God's role in sports? Find out what they have to say. How do you see it? Where do you see God present in your playing sports or in your physical activity in your PE class? We can go on to prayer. How should you pray before playing, right? Certainly as teachers, we want to help students to see that praying before and after games and practices and classes is an important thing. But ask the open-ended question first, and then dive into how we can bring about God's presence in play and awareness of that presence. And really how he is so present in our communal activities such as play. Candidly, PE is a class that kids usually love, right? Because it allows them to play a game that they enjoy. So showing that God is present in their play and helping them to reflect on this truth can open a whole new world to kids that they may not have at all thought about before. Really helping them to see God at work and to experience his love and presence in an activity that they truly enjoy can be a beautiful thing, right? It can open up a whole new relationship with God because too often God is sort of off to the side when it comes to physical activity. We talk about God in religion class, but what does that have to do with playing sports? And if we can make that connection, and through the course of being very intentional about our instruction, we can draw that in, then not only can we develop the whole athlete, right, from our perspective as a PE teacher, mentally, physically, spiritually, socially, emotionally, but we can help develop their relationship with God. And what greater thing could we accomplish as teachers than to help develop that relationship through our class?
And now, an important element of any PE curriculum, we believe, should be an emphasis on mindfulness and meditation to self-regulate and self-monitor. We know, especially in this year, post-COVID, the depression rates have skyrocketed with students and adults. We know that kids are often socially a year or two behind in their typical maturation. And so meditation and mindfulness is a way to help kids learn how to self-regulate when feeling out of sync, when feeling anxious, when feeling depressed, when feeling angry. And so to self-regulate internally, to connect internally with Christ, to calm oneself is a great effective tool for our youth. And so there are several types of meditation and mindfulness, including the Examine, which is from the Jesuit tradition, mindfulness practices, breathing practices. The one that we will take you through here is Christian meditation as really a core meditation practice. And so I'm going to ask you to actually do this. Put yourself in the shoes of your 5th through 8th grader, and I'd like you to sit down with your feet firmly on the ground. I'd like you to rest your hands on your knees. If you turn your palms up, you're opening yourselves to the presence of Christ. If you turn your palms down, press them onto your knees, you're rooting yourself in the Spirit's presence within your body. Make your back straight. If you feel comfortable, close your eyes gently or just lower your eyelids or focus on a point on the wall in front of you so that you gently lower your gaze. Now I invite you to take some deep breaths. I'd like you to breathe in, deep breath in, hold it at the top, and exhale through your mouth with an audible sigh. Another deep breath in, breathing in peace, and breathe out with that audible sigh, any anxiety. Now, I'd like to suggest a prayer or a mantra as your breathing continues. The mantra that I'm going to ask that you say to yourself internally is Maranatha. And this simply means, come, Lord Jesus. I'd like you to say it in 4 syllables as you breathe in Maranatha. And as you breathe out, Maranatha. So that your meditation is in connection with your breathing in and breathing out. Breathe in, Maranatha. Breathe out, Maranatha, calling upon Lord Jesus to come into your heart and your soul. Now, distractions will come. That's normal. There'll be noise in the background. That's part of our life condition. As you become aware of these noises and distractions, just return to your mantra, allowing Jesus's presence above that distraction. Now we're going to practice this Christian meditation right now together for 1 minute. I just want you to say Maranatha as you breathe in and breathe it out. For 1 minute, we're ready and we'll go. And you'll hear a bell when our minute is over. And then I invite you as a teacher to say, how did you experience this time to just breathe in the Spirit's presence to your beautiful body and breathing out any challenge you might be feeling? Allow the students to give you impact on that meditation. Have them write how the meditation impacted them, how they felt after the meditation, and that self-regulation that it will elicit. All right. This is a conclusion of our PE faith formation and character development. We hope that we've given you some very tangible ideas to connect in your physical education classroom, and we wish you many blessings as you work with your students to bring Christ and character and virtue implicit and present in their physical play.
Saw here on the screen, contact for us. Also, here's that QR code again to access those digital resources. Please do access that. You'll see the criteria we talked about there, link to the Vatican's Giving the Best of Yourself, and then also some of the ideas we had on the program format and those types of things. So please do take advantage of that, either via the link or the QR code. So glad you could join us here today, and we are thrilled to be a part of the NCEA 2022 convention, both virtually and in person in April. Thank you all for being here.
God bless you all.